Hi, Max Kesier. Welcome back to the Kesier Report. Time now to go to Reggie Middleton of BoomBustBlog.com. Reggie Middleton, welcome back to the Kesier Report.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, Reggie, let's talk tech. Everyone is buying Apple, but you put out a report recently saying that the real value in the space is Google. Tell us about it.
Well, the real unrecognized value is Google. Everybody recognizes value in Apple. The fact that they make gobs of money is, indisputable. But the problem is everybody owns Apple. Everybody thinks Apple is going to grow at the same rate it's been growing, which, is highly unlikely. And there's very little unrecognizing with Apple. As a matter of fact, the only thing that is unrecognized is the fact that Apple has a lot of competition and a lot of barriers to replicating its historic growth. Well, Google is, think of it as an iceberg with the vast majority of its mass resting underwater where you can't see it. Google is thought of as a search engine and an ad agency, when realistically Google is looking to be the shepherd of data, global data, all data, whether it's data that's stored on hard drives, data that's searched, data that is streamed via media or audio. And they have control of several markets that nobody even thought they'd touch just a few years ago. So they went from a search engine to the #1 mobile operating OS, over 50% of share, to the largest ad agency on the web, to what would soon probably be the largest cloud service on the web, if they're not the largest cloud service already, if you count, Gmail and everything else. That's an awful lot of power. And the way Google works, their business model is they cost shift. Normally, companies get a product or a service and they sell it to the end user, the customer, and the customer buys it for them with cash. What Google does is they shift the cost from the end user or the consumer to a third party that also benefits from paying Google. That's why Google is allowed or is enabled to give you some of the web's best services without you paying for it. Gmail, YouTube, HD video storing and streaming, Google Drive, Google Maps. You could go down the list, Google Voice. They do this by cost shifting. When you cost shift, you bring a competent and competitive product to the market, and you give low or zero cost to it. It's very, very difficult for companies who are used to making fat margins to compete with free, especially if that free product is competitive or better than the product that you're offering. In terms of Android, Google actually has a negative margin project. It's less than free. Google gives away Android and then has revenue sharing with downloads and ads, where those that use Android can actually benefit and make money from the end users using Android. With a negative margin product, how do you compete? It's hard enough to compete with free. How do you compete with less than free? Which is why Android is growing so quickly. What Google has done with Android was they've created a new business model. Now, most people think they've created a new tech or new OS, and they didn't. They bought a OS and they expanded it. What they did was created a new business model to use open source software to compete with fat margin companies such as Apple, Nokia, RIM, Microsoft. And outside of Apple, you see what happens to all the other companies.
All right, so Reggie, you used a term there, open source, relating to Google's model. And this, of course, would be software that is basically free. So contrasting that with Apple, Apple, of course, has a very, digital rights managed enclosed garden or walled garden, as they call it, a very proprietary network. So it looks as though free, in this sense, is going to trump the pay-for software model. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, that would be my guess, but let me correct. The Google software is not free. I don't believe there's no such thing as free. Somebody's paying for it somewhere. The way open source works is your upfront investment, it doesn't come out of pocket because you can get the code without paying for it. But you still have to manage the code, upgrade it, care for it, etc. So basically, the cost is smoothed out and shifted versus being purchased from a proprietary vendor and having to use it. With that being said, this model does have lower friction over time, in my opinion, than the proprietary Apple model. And one of the reasons is because you have everybody contributing to the source, so it gets improved very, very quickly. If you take a look at Android when it first came out, it was a buggy operating system. It had its issues. In 3 years, within 3 to 4 years, Android is by far the best operating system out with the most advanced hardware. Apple can't compete because no matter how many programmers Apple may have, say 5,000, they're never going to compete with the 1 million programmers that contribute to Android's open source, plus the 5 to 10 to 15,000 that Google may have. I'm just throwing a nominal number out, on staff. With that, so looking at these numbers, Apple can't compete with the rest of the world, or the rest of the programming world. And then you get to the point where, as you spread out costs, prices come down. And then this brings us back to the Microsoft-Apple competition from the 1980s and early 1990s, in which Apple had a very competent product, but they kept it as a niche product, and they tried to go high-end for profits. Microsoft distributed Windows as far and as wide as possible. They dropped the cost of the hardware. By dropping the cost of the hardware, you drop the margins, and essentially almost put Apple out of business. They were very close to filing bankruptcy. Microsoft, Bill Gates, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, gave a personal investment into Apple, and agreed to continue to make Microsoft Office for Apple to assist him in staying in business, which is in his best benefit and best interest, of course. Outside of being a good investment, it kept the antitrust pressures off of his back, which came down anyway, of course.